Welcome back to the Mainstream with Daniel Wild and John Roskam.
This week, Dan, we've discovered Australians have had a gutful.
They've had a gutful.
What have we had a gutful of?
We've had a gutful of welcome to country and acknowledgement.
You mean we've had a gutful of being divided?
We've had a gutful of being divided, and we'll talk about being
What
divided.
have you discovered? What have the Mainstream told you?
The Mainstream have told us, so we asked in a survey, we commissioned it by a polling firm, and I'll talk about that. Do you feel that Aboriginal welcome to country ceremonies have become divisive? 56% say yes, 17% say no, and 27% are unsure.
That's an overwhelming result. So why do we still get welcome to countries?
Well, it's become a core celeb of the activists. You know, it's become.
But I thought we voted no to division. I thought 60% of Australians voted no to the voice, and I thought we voted to be together.
Well, we did, and this is, I think, an example of how it doesn't really matter how you vote in this country anymore. We voted against division. We voted against the voice.
Why do you hate democracy?
Why does the Victorian government hate democracy?
Well, that's the question.
So I think it's an example of people don't want this, but it's more ubiquitous than it's ever been before. When, you know, every time a plane lands, every sporting event, every school assembly, every board meeting at a corporate, and so on and so on.
Every toolbox meeting
of street sweepers in Melbourne, we get the welcome to country and the acknowledgement of country. And Australians have said they have enough. We don't want it anymore. And what's really interesting, John, is there's some who say, oh, well, you know, fair enough, we don't want welcome to country all the time, but we can do it before major events. Well, Australians don't want that either. Only 30% said they want welcome to countries before sporting matches, and only 34% said they want welcome to countries before Anzac Day services. So only 1/3 of Australians want it really at all anywhere.
So I think you said gutful in the media. In the national media, do we have to get you a slab every time the word gutful from Dan Wild appears in the national media?
I certainly hope so. I'd be pretty...
So what did you say?
Well, I think it's just reflecting what people think, which is...
No, well, give us the quote.
Absolute gutful. I said Australians have had absolute gutful of something like performative and divisive welcome to country practices.
And then you had to take it up a notch when you wrote about this for the Financial Review.
Yes, yeah. Well, the Financial Review...
No gutful references.
No gutful in the Financial Review, but
what did you say in the Fin?
Well, in the Fin Review, the point there was when, you know, a lot of people talk about the leaders that we used to have, John Howard, Bob Hawke as an example of that, and how they were able to drive economic reform. And the point that I made in the piece in the Financial Review was they were able to bring the community with them on issues that the community didn't necessarily support because the community trusted them, that they reflected and understood mainstream Australian values, that they weren't going to take advantage of them.
They didn't look down upon us.
They didn't look down upon us. They did it from a position of trust. And the way you get trust is through culture and through values and showing people that you understand who they are, the Australian character, the Australian way of life. And so Bob Hawke didn't give his bicentennial address talking about a productivity summit or roundtable. He said all Australians are equal. There's no hierarchy of descent in Australia. I used also the example of John Howard at the Australia Day address to the National Press Club in 2006, where he said social cohesion is our cement as a society, our shared values. When was the last time we heard that from a political leader in Australia?
Oh, well, I've heard leaders told they can't talk about culture, but they can talk about what modern Australia is. So, Dan, are you saying that modern Australia doesn't like welcome to country and doesn't like acknowledgement to country?
No, because they want equality.
So why did Susan
fairness.
Lee acknowledge the traditional owners at her first major speech at the press club last week?
Well, don't ask her who they were, because she didn't say. She didn't say who are they then? If you're going to say, I acknowledge the traditional owners, at least say who you think they are.
But she did have time to talk about quotas, which we'll come on to in a moment.
Yes. But I think the other thing that's developed in this area, John, is what's happened in Victoria. And the reason we're talking about Victoria is two reasons. One is it's a playbook for the rest of the country.
Some people have called it a petri dish.
A petri dish for Australia.
I think that was our friend Matthew Sheehan at Advance. And the first time he said that, I said, well, I'm a proud born Victorian, but the trouble is he's not wrong. Mm. We've seen in Victoria, well, you go on to
the economy as well, yeah.
Well, the economy.
Everyone else will have to bail out Victoria.
Yeah, and we'll move to the Gold Coast. But in Victoria, we saw this week what would have happened if we'd got the voice.
If we got the voice, which was what's called the Yuruk Commission. So the Europe Commission was set up to look into purported historical grievances, colonialism, the history of Victoria, and so forth. They delivered their first report this week, and it is basically the complete and total racial separation of Victoria. Let me read out to you a couple of recommendations. So this is what they want. So recommendation 4 is they say hypothecation of a portion of land, water, and natural resources related revenues, which means handing over money, which is reparations payments. Recommendation 8, a statewide treaty legislation. Recommendation 14C, they talk about redress in terms of land and compensation. So once again, that's basically reparations payments. Recommendation 96, which goes to your point, the establishment of a permanent First Peoples representative body, which is a voice to
So
Parliament.
for that, let's unpack that.
But there was like 100. I've just read out 4.
You've read it, yeah.
There's like
and they're not
literally
even the worst, but there's 7 million Victorians. I think there's about 80,000, 70,000 Victorians who identify as Indigenous. Only 4,000 Indigenous Victorians voted at the elections for the First Nations Assembly. And we're talking about not just the creation of 1 or 2 Indigenous nations in Victoria. We're talking about multiples.
Yeah, dozens, hundreds.
Dozens.
How many would there be?
But what struck me, looking at this, we were told that this is truth-telling. This is about history that Victorians and Australians need to know. And, of course, we do need to know our history. But what the Commission got wrong is even basic things like the meaning of 1967. So they expect that they can tell us the truth and we should accept it, but they can't even identify what the truth is. So, Dan, this is from page 259 of volume 1 of the report that was released this week. It's a reference to citizenship. Aboriginal people would not be recognised as citizens until the 1967 referendum. That is an utter and complete misunderstanding. It is an utter falsehood about Australian citizenship, about the relationship between Indigenous and non-Indigenous Australians, and yet somehow they expect us to accept their version of the truth when they can't even tell us what 1967 was about. So
when did Aboriginals become citizens?
They've always been citizens, as migrants have always been citizens up to the 1940s and 50s. We were effectively British citizens. Indigenous Australians were discriminated against. They didn't have the rights of other Australians in many circumstances. But the idea that Indigenous Australians weren't citizens is as wrong as the idea that has been promulgated for many years that Indigenous Australians were regarded under the Flora and Fauna Act. It is a misunderstanding of 1967. It doesn't understand that 1967 was about 2 relatively minor changes to the Constitution, but hugely symbolically significant changes. But to misconstrue our history like that, I think is just incredibly dangerous as well.
You know what's interesting about the 67 referendum? So 90% of Australians across the country voted yes to make us more equal. Guess what state had the highest vote?
New South Wales.
Victoria. 95% of Victorians wanted equality. And yet Victoria is the state of division now. It used to be the state of equality. Now it's the state of division.
But isn't that a statement about Australia? I mean, I wrote this many times in our discussions about the voice. You know, the argument...
Well, it's gone from 90 to 60.
That the voice was the continuation of 67. It was the opposite. It was the undoing of 1967. But
the no vote was the continuation.
The no vote was the continuation, but it was the elites swapping their position and reversing themselves. In 1967, the whole Australian community came together and said, let's vote for equality. So even though, as I said, they were legal and technical changes, the publicity, the advertising, what all the political parties said. There was even a song by a band I discovered called The Pogs out of Sydney, and they wrote a little jingle, vote for Australians to all be equal. And that was played on radio stations around the country. But then the elites, sometime between 1967 and 2023, decided that we shouldn't be equal. But you were telling me before we came on air that you had an experience with a Labor MP and you needed to explain to them what 1967 was about.
I did, John. So
what happened?
Well, it goes to your point of, so this Europe Commission don't know what 1967 is. So the Labor Party doesn't know what 1967 is. So this is a long-term this is not some new person that just rocked up. This is a long-term MP called Graham Perrott.
Hello, Graham, if you're watching and listening.
Graham,
you'll probably be sent this podcast.
And the song.
Hello, Graham.
And the song. Didn't even know what 1967 referendum was about. So my colleague Margaret Chambers and I gave evidence before what's called a joint standing committee. So this is a part of what we do at the IPA. We give evidence before committees that scrutinise bills. So this was called the Joint Standing Committee on Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Affairs. It was in February of this year, and we were in Sydney to do this. And the matter that they were analysing was so-called Truth and Justice Commission Bill.
Which was a Greens bill, I think.
A Greens bill, which was basically what they've done in Victoria.
Which was even though the Voice was defeated, let's have the Voice anyway.
The Voice plus
truth-telling
and reparations. Yeah. So it says here the bill is intended to establish a commission to inquire into and make recommendations on matters relating to historic and ongoing injustices. So basically what we've seen in Victoria. So I had an interaction with Graham Perrott, where I had to educate him on what 1967.
Go on, read it out.
I'll read. Look, it's a couple of pages worth here. So this is a bit.
I've got a coffee. I've settled in.
Settle in. It's a bit self-indulgent. So he says here, I want to clarify. 1967, I think 91% of Australians said we do want the Commonwealth to make decisions based on race.
So he said that.
He said He said we want the Commonwealth to make decisions based on race, and I said it's the opposite, which is that it removed references to race in the Constitution. And he said, I can read the bit of the Constitution to you if you'd like. And I said, please, go for it. But it removed it. And he said, it took the race power from states and gave it to the Commonwealth. And I said, yes. But the key part of that referendum was to remove a reference to race within the Constitution. And then Mr. Perrott said, I must have read a different Constitution to you. And then I said to him...
Did he say that nicely, snarkily?
He was a bit snarky at this point.
Snarky?
Because he realised what was happening.
He realised you might know more about 1967
He realised he didn't know what he was talking about. So he tried to get out of it. And then I said to him, you can have a look at the Constitution before and the Constitution after. I said, you will see...
of the committee at this stage?
No, but he did cut me off. So it says, and in the part in here, and this is on the hands, this is the official record. I said, and you will see... dash. So he's cut me out, and I've got it in front. And he says this: I've got it in front of me, but clearly he didn't. So let me read this to Graham Perrott. If you're watching this, this is what it says. This is what you didn't understand. An act to alter the Constitution so as to omit certain words relating to the people of the Aboriginal race in any state, and so that Aboriginals can be counted in the reckoning of the population, which was the census. So removing references to race in the Constitution is exactly what the 1967 referendum was about. Labor doesn't understand that. The Europe Commission doesn't understand that. The elites don't understand that. What they don't understand is the Australian way of life is based on equality, that we are all equal. We should all be treated as equal. And every single time Australians are asked about it, that is exactly what we say. Graham.
Well put.
Rant
How
over.
did it finish? Did you shake hands afterwards?
No, we certainly did not. He went on to all these vague things. Do you think race exists as a concept? I said, yes, I do. And then he's talking about how he's got some Anglo-Celtic background or something. It's like, well, congratulations. Congratulations.
But isn't it interesting?
But the point here is this is an elected member of Parliament presiding over a serious matter who doesn't even understand basic Australian history.
And who does? Well, and as you said, the Europe Commission don't.
No.
But mainstream Australians do. And they might not be familiar with the technicalities of 67 or exactly, the additional chapters that would have been inserted into the Constitution under the Voice, but they know as a principle, and I think this was the significance, and we've spoken about this since the Voice, the significance of the reason why 60.06% of Australians voted no was because they didn't want to be divided by race, because it was a philosophical position. And it's interesting, we often talk about Australians being pragmatic and practical and and down to earth. which I think to some extent we are. I don't know whether particularly different from those of any other nation, but this was a clear philosophical position that Australians took on equality. But as you said at the beginning of this discussion today, why do we vote no? Why are we asked an opinion on anything when we'll get it anyway?
Yeah.
And Jacinda Allen, when she was asked here in Victoria, what is the difference between Victorians saying no to the voice and you doing this? She said, well, that would have, Victorians said no to the voice because it would have been in the Constitution. This isn't going to be in the Constitution. No, it's the principle that counts.
And, well, so the point is, why does this happen? I mean,
because we let it happen.
We let it happen. But
we let it happen. The coalition let it happen. Peter Dutton let it happen. Peter Dutton didn't give a single speech, didn't ever mention the greatest victory for equality in Australia since 1967. The centre-right, and it's not just the Liberal Party, the centre-right, too often doesn't want to engage in culture. It's afraid to talk about these issues. It's afraid to celebrate victories, and it's afraid to push back. Here in Victoria, Brad Batten, as opposition leader, to his credit, said that he wouldn't be implementing a treaty, but the Victorian coalition supported the legislation to set up this heroic process in the first place.
They did say they would scrap a voice, didn't they?
They did.
So that's a positive development. All it took was a referendum to give them the courage to do it. But isn't the point,
two changes of leaders.
But isn't the point here that democracy is basically now dead in Australia? I mean, doesn't it show that it doesn't matter how you vote, you're going to get the elitist-driven agenda anyway? It doesn't matter what your opinion is as a mainstream Australian. You do not have any political representation in this country. If you believe Australia is a good country, you believe there should be one flag, not three. If you've had a gutful of welcome to country, if you don't want to be divided by race, who do you vote for? You don't have an option.
You will vote for one of the minor parties.
You'll vote for a minor party, but through preferences you get. So Labor gets 30%, just over 33% of the vote. They get 90-odd seats
and
because
there were,
of compulsory preferential
voting. And there was
voting.
new data that came out. I think Labor got 2/3 of the minor party preferences.
Yeah. So really, what can you do? So democracy is...
So do we move to Britain and vote for Farage?
Well, you can move to Britain and vote for Farage. Well, this is...
Because you've been having a look at this.
I've had a look at this, but this is even more fascinating what's happening in Britain. So only less than a year ago, Keir Starmer and Labor win in what is the biggest landslide in modern British history. The biggest. Now he is completely plummeted. It's imploded, and Nigel Farage, if an election were held today, Nigel Farage would be PM. And
where are his votes coming from?
So,
what's happened?
Well, more of the votes are coming from Labor voters rather than Conservative voters. So in the UK, you've basically got the Labor Party, you've got the Tories, and they were always the two. Then you had the Lib Dems, which is kind of like the Teals, I would say. They only ever really win votes in London. They're kind of like a Teal party. The Greens exist there, but they don't really...
Only in Brighton.
Very
and
little.
I've been to Brighton. I can see why the Greens exist in Brighton.
Yeah, and then you've got the Scottish National Party that win votes in Scotland.
Yeah.
That's basically how it's always been. And then you have Reform that only came on the scene as a party. I mean, Nigel Farage has been around for a while. He was Mr. Brexit. Like, he got Brexit done. He did UKIP and all of this. And then he only started just before the last election. And he's gone from basically within a year of zero to now being the next Prime Minister. So if we go through some of this recent polling, I think it'll show you where Australia is going in terms of the lack of satisfaction with leaders. So this is Keir Starmer. So this is satisfaction with leaders in the government. So Keir Starmer, who just won in a massive landslide, he's at negative 54. Negative 54. Kemi Badenoch, who's Tory leader, negative 49.
For the time being.
Nigel's negative 15. Right, so...
Okay, so this is the UK. Let's apply that to Australia. I get those figures. Full credit to Anthony Albanese.
Why is that?
Because he's not in those death zone figures yet, if ever he will be. There was a poll that came out from Redbridge this week that said most Australians are happy with how they voted at the last election, and we'll come to some of the consequences of that polling in a moment. And there's no challenge on the right for the Liberal Party.
Yeah.
So happy days for Anthony Albanese.
Yeah. But Australians didn't vote enthusiastically.
Yeah, only a third of Australians voted first preference Labor.
Yeah, and a third coalition roughly.
Yeah.
So, yeah, there's no leadership. Who do you vote for if you want change?
You stay at home, you vote grudgingly, you don't volunteer, you don't donate.
So what is the solution that's been offered to improve representation? Is it having a vision for the future of Australia? Is it
bringing Australia together? Let's talk about what we have in common rather than how we're different. Let's talk about the fact that... I've got one more point that I want to add. Let's talk about the fact that Australia in the developed world has the highest proportion of its population either born overseas or born of first-generation migrants. So therefore, we have to make a special effort to be patriotic, to love our nation and to love each other and to share things together and not be divided.
But instead we're getting...
quotas.
Gender. So Labor is the party of racial quotas and the Liberals are the party of gender quotas.
Well, can I use that in a column?
You can use that in a column.
That's very good.
Yeah. So not that we want to bang on about this too much.
Come up with that just then?
Yes. Yeah.
That's very good. We didn't even prepare for that. But we did prepare for Janet Albrechtson's column.
Yes, so talk about quotas.
We did prepare for me to read out.
But what are quotas? In the context of politics, what does a quota mean? It means that you're going to have...
a set number of positions by proportion or number allocated to gender, and let's not even discuss what gender is, given that Peter Dutton refused to say what a woman was during the election campaign. That's a sidebar. But the consequence would be then, and this happens in the Labor Party, that merit doesn't apply if a position has to be filled to fulfil a gender quota. Sorry, go on.
I was going to say, so this relates to Susan Lee's presentation speech at the press club. And what happens at the press club is it's basically someone speaking to journalists.
You go and suck up to lefty journalists.
So then, but what happens?
So that they're nice to you.
So they're nice and
they were nice to Malcolm Turnbull until they weren't.
And then you give your speech, and then the journalists ask questions.
Yeah.
So why didn't the journalist ask Susan Lee, if you believe in gender quotas for women, can you tell me what a woman is?
No, I listened to all of Susan Lee's speech. I read it, and I've listened to all of the questions. No one asked that.
No, but quotas?
But quotas, they were all over quotas. They were all over quotas, factionalism and climate change.
That's the elites.
That's the elite. But former IPA chairman, wonderful Australian Janet Albrechtson had this piece in the Australian, and not that the podcast is going to turn into long quotes from Janet's terrific articles. But look, you can't go past the first few pages. So you read...
I'll settle in. I don't have a coffee.
Okay, you want to settle in?
Yeah.
Okay.
I don't like coffee after 2 o'clock. Remember, I can't sleep at night.
You did have a cup of tea before.
I had a cup of tea, so I'll be right.
So this is just the first cup. And I know many viewers will have, and listeners will have read this or seen this, but it's just so good. Let's luxuriate in it again. So this is how Janet begins. If embracing gender quotas will solve the woes facing the Liberal Party right now, then get moving. Draw up the quota policy today, please. If that's what it takes to defeat the Albanese government, and bonus, toss out Teal MPs in inner city seats, there's not a minute to waste. Welcome to another round of the Liberals must have quotas. So-called progressives inside and outside the Liberal Party are nothing if not opportunistic and shallow. The ABC has shifted gears from its usual breathless activism about gender quotas to orgiastic. The Labor government is excited to have the Conservatives distracted by another interminable gender debate. Alas, gender quotas are a shallow prescription for a much deeper problem. The Liberals are irrelevant today because they are mediocre. It's that simple. Mediocre policies, mediocre team, mediocrity through and through. And this is a great bit. The mediocre don't realise they're mediocre, of course. So when Liberals say they are committed to a merit-based selection process, whether overlaid with gender filter or not, what they are really promising is more people like them. A quality candidate might risk showing up. So I could spend the next 10 minutes reading out the whole piece, but it's terrific. Yeah. But you get a feeling for the point Janet was making, and I think the point that many Australians are making, which is identity politics on race, gender, sexuality or anything else, is antithetical to liberal democracy.
And isn't it also the case that it won't actually really improve representation? So yes, you'll get, if you have quotas, yes, by definition, you'll get more women into Parliament in this case, but you're not going to get more working class women from Frankston into Parliament. But it'll be inner city professional types that end up in Parliament. So it just further embeds the problem that the problem is not men, women or whatever. The problem is that we have an elitist conclave that exists independent of the mainstream of society. We don't have enough normal people in Parliament. When you're someone like a street sweeper who says, I don't want to do acknowledgement of country before I have a toolbox meeting, I'm going to sweep the streets, you get fired from your job by the very same people that would benefit from quotas. So it would further embed the problem that we already have. And if we're going to have any quotas, why don't we have quotas for working class people? Why don't we have quotas for
non-university educated people? So Susan Lee absolutely correctly says the Liberal Party, any political party, should reflect and represent the nation. All right, if we really want to reflect and represent the nation, then 2/3 of the nation don't have university qualifications. Well, it's now slightly less, but that's not, Parliament isn't representative of those people.
No.
So Susan Lee says...
It's quotas for people like me. Yeah. That's what it is.
Susan Lee says the Liberal Party has a problem with women and therefore there need to be quotas. But this polling says that from Redbridge indicates that the Liberal Party's polling with women is not its only problem.
Really? Oh, that surprises me given the election outcome. What do these genius pollsters say?
Well, these genius pollsters point out that at the moment, if there was to be an election, 30% of women say they will vote Liberal. 32% of men say they will vote Liberal. So, all right. So, if we're
no one wants to vote Liberal.
Hang on. So, we've got to fix the problem of 30% voting of Liberal voting of women voting Liberal with quotas. How do we fix the problem of 32% of men?
Quotas for men. Quotas for men as well.
How does that work? But, and this is, we looked at the election result. You can look at this polling. You can look at a whole bunch of factors. The Liberal Party right at the minute is not popular anywhere. So they talk about, the Liberal Party has an inner city problem. So again, according to this polling, so 29% of inner city voters will vote coalition. All right. Well, the Liberal Party has a problem with outer suburbs. 30% will vote coalition. Rural electorates, 32% coalition, 32% ALP, 8% Green, 28% other. So if we're talking about who isn't being represented in the political process at the moment, you've got 1/3 of people in rural areas who don't feel that the mainstream parties are representing them.
Yeah. I think the question that comes up for me is, why is this happening? So, I think because obviously if you want to, you would say, well, there's an opportunity there because there's a lot of people who don't feel represented. So there's an opportunity to win their votes by providing policies that appeal to them. So why don't the major parties do this? I think a part of it is, Labor is...
Well, you were the candidate, you tell me.
Well, I didn't do very well, so maybe someone else should be giving me...
You got a swing to you in some...
Oh, in a lot of booths, yeah. 16 out of 45 booths.
You got the least worst result in South Australia.
I did. Well, I think a part of it is... We might have talked about this last week, but a part of it is no one actually trusts politicians.
Why should I? I voted no to the voice and I'm getting it anyway.
They do it anyway. So it further ingrains that. But going back, the reason why the UK example is important is because they have a different voting system. They have a first past the post voting system, which means whoever has the most votes wins. And it's voluntary voting. So it's harder for the major parties to stop a minor party getting a national profile. Nigel Farage couldn't happen here. It's not possible in our voting system. So people are telling us they don't like the system because that's why the preferences of the major parties are at historic lows. But there's no way that their views... There is no political party that is formed to be a vehicle for that disgruntled vote. It goes to a minor party, but then those minor party votes end up going to the major parties.
And the major parties, and I'll use the term, and I'll use it again, rig the system. They rig it through public funding. They rig it through electoral laws. They rig it through compulsory preferential voting. It is a duopoly, and duopolies can only last for a certain amount of time before they break.
You've got a book you wanted to talk about as well.
Talking about democracy, talking about totalitarianism, I've been reading, Dan, Frank Knopfelmacher selected writings, It is an outstanding book, showing the cover now. We're only 6 months away from Christmas. Buy it for yourself and for your friends. So very simply, Frank Knopfelmacher was born in Czechoslovakia. He was from a Jewish family. He escaped Czechoslovakia just before the Holocaust began. He went to Israel. He fought in the 8th Army. He fought in the Western Desert. He fought in Normandy. He went to Britain, then came to Australia, teaching psychology and philosophy and politics at the University of Melbourne. He was a great freedom fighter. He fought against totalitarianism. He identified that Hitler and Stalin are two sides of the same coin. He talked about the denigration of freedom in Australia. He was a huge influence on a generation of intellectuals and politicians also, like Peter Costello. Peter Costello spoke at the launch of the book. So Frank's son, a wonderful person, Andrew, has selected 30 of Frank's best essays to be put in this publication that came out from Connor Court recently. And it's significant not just because it's a snapshot into someone who stood by his principles. He was denied promotion. He was denied jobs because of his anti-communism. And this was at a time when there literally were communists throughout the faculties of in universities through Australia. But it was also someone who didn't he didn't ever budge from his principles. He was willing to call issues out as they were. And given that I've read out a couple of things, I just want to take an example from a quote from his 1964 essay. And he writes about these things, and he wrote a lot about universities, and we're seeing now it's happening to Australia's universities. He predicted so much of what was going to happen. And he talked about the Marxists in Australia and the Stalinists in the 1950s and 60s. And he said, for an Australian academic to have sympathised with Stalin and the movement then must surely have either been a symptom of intellectual incompetence or of moral depravity. And if we're looking for a discussion about what courage means and about the principles of freedom, you can't go past, as I said, this wonderful collection of essays from our friends at Connor Court, Frank Knopfelmacher selected writings, and we've got an extended review and discussion of the book in the next edition of IPA Essays for Australia that's coming out in the next month.
Right, and how many? You said there's 40?
30 essays that range from the 1950s to the 1970s. And the lesson for someone reading this in 2025 is be clear about your purpose, identify the evil, and do what you can to call it out, because there's many more people who agree with you than will ever admit it. And of course, I always come back to that, those lines in 1984 where Orwell talks about the point of Big Brother is to convince the citizens that no one thinks like them. So when and that no alternative is possible. And that no alternative is possible. So that when you're standing at or listening to a Welcome to Country event and you think, look, I just don't feel comfortable with this, but you can't express it. Yeah. You think it's divisive, and the elites will do everything they can to convince you that you're the only person standing there at the Shrine of Remembrance at 6 a.m. at an Anzac Day ceremony thinking this acknowledgement has got no place on Australia's most sacred day. And in fact, nearly everyone in the audience is thinking the same thing, but no one says it.
I wanted to end on one thing, not a book that I've been reading, but something that I'm frustrated with, if I can share it with you. Please. I love cricket. You're not a bad cricketer. Oh, I'm okay. I'm okay number 6 batting
you're a slashing middle order.
Slashing middle order, fielding at fine leg. But I don't know what the word is, but it's the fact that Cricket Australia have just said once again that they're not having a cricket match on Australia Day.
But cricket is Australia's national sport.
Well, Cricket Australia also has the word Australia in it. If you're ashamed of Australia, you're in the wrong job, right? And so...
You've come up with 2 classics today. That's the second one. Take out... Why don't you call on Cricket Australia to take out the word Australia?
Cricket, Australia, yeah, and take out the word cricket as well while they're at it. No, but it annoys me because growing up, I grew up in Adelaide, live in Adelaide now, there was always the one-day international match on the 26th of January.
Yep.
And what you would have is also that's when Triple J had their hottest 100. So I can have very good memories of being at the cricket on the 26th of January when it's about 752 degrees in Adelaide.
And Adelaide is always hotter than anywhere else in Australia in summer.
And you've got people that are playing Triple J's hottest 100, watching the cricket, Australian flags waving, everyone's having a good time. It's a time when people came together in a relaxed and comfortable environment, enjoying the Australian summer, watching Australia.
Thinking this place is okay.
This is a good place. So watching Australia absolutely pummel whoever it was we were playing, because we had Shane Warne and Glenn McGrath just ripping through everyone all the time. And now it's all been ruined.
Now we've got Pat Cummins.
Yeah. He's a good bowler, but he's woke. So and Usman Khawaja. I mean, come on. I mean, so what annoys me is that it's yet...
So what was the excuse they gave?
They didn't really give an excuse. It just wasn't scheduled. So, but why does this annoy me? It annoys me because it was an opportunity to celebrate our country and feel good and enjoy it while we did it. And it's yet another forum that's been taken away from us to do that. We're not allowed to do that anymore.
Well, talking about Essays for Australia, which is coming out very soon, the great Alan Hurd has done a wonderful piece on sport in Australia, and he talks about how sport used to bring us all together. He, of course, played for Essendon, his father of James, and he said that back in the 50s, you could be a trade unionist, you could be a capitalist, you could be on the shop floor, you could be the manager, you could be Labor, Liberal, DLP, anything else. But sport was something that was sacred and special that could bring you all together. But not now.
Not now. On that cheery note, we'll leave it there for this week, John. Good to chat again.
Thanks, Dan.